been called the Nostradamus of elections. He's correctly predicted 9 of the last 10. That is, until the early hours of Wednesday morning, when CNN predicted Donald Trump would win the presidency. I'm talking about Professor Alan Lichtman. He says his 13 keys are how he makes his predictions for the White House. Here's the moment he realized his prediction was wrong.
I'm starting to get a little nervous.
Yeah,
She needs to make up 170,000
I
votes.
don't see it. The big Democratic counties are mostly in.
No, well, yeah. Shit.
I just don't see it. Good thing I have nothing to do tomorrow,
Yeah, I took off work tomorrow.
and I'm not doing any interviews.
Good.
I'm done with that.
So, what happens to the keys now? Well, Professor Alan Lichtman is here with us tonight to tell us what he thinks went wrong. Professor, thank you for joining us tonight. I mean, we've talked many times. Were the keys wrong, or was your interpretation off this time?
I think the fundamental problem was the keys, not my interpretation. No one's convinced me that was wrong. There are unique features. I've always said, some unique features could break the patterns of history, and I think that's happened here. First of all, a unique feature specific to this election. And you've heard me say this before. I was very critical of the Democrats for openly and viciously trashing their sitting president right out in public. I have never seen that before, and I've studied politics since the founding. And we saw Biden's approval rating plummet as they were doing that. I think that extended beyond Biden to weaken any Democratic candidate since they're discrediting their own administration. Secondly, it rendered problematic one of my keys, the contest key, since we couldn't have a primary, but the Democrats did unite around Harris, and I turned the key in their favor, but we had never seen anything like that before, and that was problematic. But more importantly, are trends that are long term and affect the long term future of our democracy and the keys, because the keys depend upon a rational, pragmatic electorate deciding based on governance whether the incumbent party should get 4 more years. And we've seen the explosion of some trends that have existed before, but not to this extent. Disinformation. Elon Musk I don't know how many hundreds of billions he has. He has been the director of misinformation. 2 billion views of his spreading of disinformation, not just about the economy, but about immigrants, about minorities. We've never seen disinformation at this scale. Next, we have never seen to this scale the agitation of 3 trends that have been very deeply embedded in American history: misogyny, racism, and xenophobia. The first anti immigrant law was 1798, and Donald
Hmm.
Trump wants to revive it. First it was the French, then the Germans, then the Jews, then the Mexicans, then the Muslims. There's always another. And of course, racism. We didn't even begin to dismantle Jim Crow until the 1960s, and it's
Yeah.
still to some extent survived. Women didn't vote until 1920. So that calls into question the whole premise behind the keys and behind our democracy.
Well, if it calls into question the premise of the keys, what about the fact that the pollster Nate Silver says that he used your keys to predict a Trump win?
Nate Silver has been criticizing the keys since he attacked me for my correct prediction early of Obama's reelection in 2011. He has a vested interest in going against the keys because they put him out of business. And look what he
Mm.
did this year. This is typical Nate Silver. He says Harris is marginally ahead. So the election is going to be, so close, 50-50. But it could go either way, with the swing states going one way to one candidate or the other. And he says, my gut favors Trump, but don't listen to my gut. So no matter
Mm.
what happens, Nate Silver can't be wrong and he can't be right because his predictions are meaningless. I admit I was wrong because I go out on a limb and tell you who's going to win or who's going to lose, and I don't try to squirm out of it. And as we're having this discussion, I'm very squarely trying to consider why I went wrong, what it means for the future of our keys and the future of our democracy.
given the fact that you talk about some of the disinformation, which seems to be the trajectory of a lot of things that dealing with the democracy, do you intend, Professor Alan Lichtman, to change your keys or adjust to an additional, maybe a 14th one to adjust for that factor?
I don't intend to change my keys on the fly. That's a recipe for disaster, particularly when these critiques come post hoc. It's very easy to say what you should do when you know the answer already. Much more difficult to do it in advance. And the keys go all the way back to 1860 in development and back to 1984 predictively. So I'm not going to very quickly change the keys based upon some critique that comes after they know what happened. But I'm very seriously going to reconsider. And I'm also wondering, are we going to have a free and fair election in 2028, which would render the keys irrelevant, but much more, threaten our democracy? That's up in the air.
Well, Monday morning quarterbacks, you're on notice from Alan Lichtman. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well,
My great pleasure. Always
thank you.
great.